Hello. Okay, this is the uh, short lecture, part one for chapter five, part one, which is only 14 pages. So I expect you to read that. But anyway, here we go. Um, it, Chapter five, part one is all about classical conditioning. The Pavlovian experiment where he showed dissociation between S-R and so um, I'm going to give you the definition, but then I'll explain it because the definition is kind of confusing. But the definition is when a neutral stimulus is paired with another stimulus that elicits an unconditioned response. Eventually, the neutral stimulus will elicit the conditioned response. And in Pavlov's experiment, they rang a bell. That wasn't the original experiment, but that's one most known. It rang a bell, and the dogs reacted all differently. Some didn't do anything, some barked, some turned their heads, some wagged their tails. So we had a stimulus with no response. That's called a neutral stimulus, an NS. And this relates to your homework because you have to label some situations. So in the Pavlov experiment, the bell was a neutral stimulus. Then he showed the dog food, and the dog salivated. Well, food is the unconditioned stimulus because you don't have to learn about food. Nobody tells you food is something you like. That's just natural. And then the dog salivated the food, which is a natural reflex. When you see food, you salivate. Your mom didn't say when you were born, like salivate, salivate, salivate. No, it's a natural reaction. So the food is the unconditioned stimulus, and responding to the food is the unconditioned response. Then he paired the bell with the food, and the dog salivated. At this time, the bell is still neutral because we're not sure if it produces the saliva. And then the food always does, so that stays the UCS, and then the UCR is salivating to the food. Eventually, you ring the bell, the dog salivated. So now the bell is a conditioned stimulus, and salivating to the bell is a conditioned response. Let me give you a little hint. The neutral stimulus always turns into the conditioned stimulus. The neutral stimulus always turns into the conditioned stimulus. And the UCR, the unconditioned response, is the same as the conditioned response, except you have a different stimulus. Unconditioned response was to the food, conditioned response was to the bell. So that's a Pavlovian experiment. We do a lot on that. We do a homework assignment, and of course, we have a bunch of questions on the test. So we need to get this to understand this. If any kind of confusion, just let me know. All forms of the classical conditioning is elicited behavior. If it's not elicited, it's not classical. Elicited means forced. We force the dogs to salivate by showing them food. I did an experiment when I was in college of blowing smoke in a baby's eyes to make them blink, and we used a clicker, and then eventually the clicker and the babies just blink like mad. We forced. So if it's elicited, it's classical. There's no ands, ifs, or buts. If you see the word elicited, it's classical. You don't need to read any further. Pavlov found four basic principles of psychology in his experiments. One was reinforcement. Reinforcement is anything that increases behavior. And I say anything because it can be anything. If behavior increases, it's reinforcement. So if somebody drops a bowling ball on your foot and your behavior increases, that's reinforcement. Don't look at what it is, look at what it does. How did Pavlov discover that? Well, after he showed the dog food, he gave the dog food, reinforcing them producing saliva. Extinction. Now, punishment, reinforcement increases behavior, punishment decreases behavior, but extinction stops behavior. Extinction is behavior stops due to lack of reinforcement. You go to a restaurant and the food's always bad, you stop going. So, extinction, how did he extinguish? He kept showing them the food and they didn't give it to him. Pretty soon, well, I'm not going to produce saliva for nothing. So he discovered extinction. He also discovered generalization. Generalization is similar stimuli produce the same response. Similar stimuli produce the same response. And in that case, he rang a bell and the dog salivated. Then he rang a triangle, in a metrodome, and all kinds of weird sounds, and the dog salivated. So they were reacting the same way to similar stimuli. It's just like, I don't know if some of you seen somebody and you saw them from the back and thought they were somebody, and you caught out their name and they weren't them, but you were generalizing from similar stimuli to the same response. And then finally, discrimination. Discrimination is only a certain stimulus produces a certain response. So in class, if I call your name, I expect you to respond, not everybody else. At one time, we had 3 dogs, and my wife had a dog, my daughter had a dog, and I had a dog. And my dog was named Mocha, and she's a smart dog. Anyway, when I called Mocha, she came. When I called one of the other dogs, she didn't come. She knew her name. She discriminated. She only came when she heard Mocha. And how did Pavlov discover discrimination? Very simple. After he realized they were generalizing, he only reinforced to the bell, and pretty soon they stopped responding to all the other sounds. So we will stop here, and we will pick this up sometime later this week, and I will, go on to part 2. Thank you.